How's it going, guys? Welcome to the channel. If you're finding this video, you're probably interested in doing a brake conversion on your car, and I have some compelling information that you might be interested in that I've acquired recently. I've been working on a research and development project for my C5 that you see back here. Basically, the idea of this project was I wanted to find a braking system that was going to be economical and easy to work on, that was also going to be easy to repair if something happened, that would also provide the performance that I'm looking for, at least from a somewhat amateur standpoint. I don't claim myself as to be a super high-end professional, but I wanted something that's going to have a little bit more bang for my buck, I guess you could say. So the original story and what happened is I saw a post on one of the Facebook pages, a C5 page, where a gentleman, I don't know if he had like a junkyard or if he worked at a shop or what the situation was, but he acquired some brake rotors, or sorry, some brake calipers from a Camaro SS. And for whatever reason, he decided to bolt them up to it looked like it was a spare C5 knuckle, where he had it on the car. The car looked like it was either in the middle of being torn down or rebuilt, or if it's a project for like a race car or something like that. But he said that he was able to bolt the caliper up, and he also had the rotor. It was a factory C5 rotor. Obviously, it was way too small, but he posted it. I asked him about it. Like, I messaged him directly. He never replied, and nothing ever followed up. Like, he didn't do anything with it. He didn't post any other pictures. He just posted that one picture of that caliper bolted up to the hub, or to the spindle, and that's all it was. So that kind of sparked an idea in my head. I was like, okay, well, if it bolts up, then what can we do with this? I wonder if there's a way that you can make this work. So I started researching it, and I've been kind of on and off for about 3 months now, where I had some other stuff going on with work and whatnot. But so it's always been in the back of my mind, but it wasn't a priority. I didn't need brakes or anything like that until about a month ago. I was getting some service done, and they told me, they're like, oh, by the way, your brake pads are down to 3 millimeters or whatever, which I kind of knew they were getting low anyway. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is time that I could start looking into this and start really researching it, because I'm ready to do brakes. My car personally has 140,000 miles on it, and I'm sure the calipers have never been changed. I'm sure the brake lines have never been changed. Rotors look like they were maybe on their second lifetime, or like second set of rotors, and then obviously the pads got changed. But yeah, so I was like, okay, well, let me see if I can start researching this. So the whole reason I'm looking into this at this point anyway is because, as I said in the beginning of the video, I wanted bang for your buck, bolt-on, 4-piston, 6-piston, whatever, fixed calipers. Because there's a certain aesthetic purpose to it. A fixed caliper will always look cooler and look better inside of a wheel than a clamp style caliper ever will. Anybody can argue that the C5 brakes, the factory C5 brakes, are good, especially on the Z51s. And they are. They absolutely are. I never had braking issues. Like I said, I do some amateur racing and stuff like that, and I've never had braking issues. But if you can do 4-piston fixed caliper versus a 2-piston clamped caliper, 4-piston caliper is always going to be better because you have more clamping force. And the fixed caliper, at least in my opinion, is more aesthetically pleasing. It just looks better. So if I can get a 4-piston or 6-piston or however many, doesn't matter. If I can get a fixed caliper on the front of my car, I'm gonna go for that, because I would love to do that. So I bought my car in December of 2021 and found out relatively quickly that GM had discontinued the 6-piston C6 Z06 calipers also came on the Grand Sport. But that was the go-to caliper for anybody who wanted to do big brakes. GM has discontinued them. And basically, what that means is the few places that might still have a legitimate, brand new, like new old stock GM calipers from ACDelco, they're gonna charge $500-600 for them now because they don't exist. And PowerStop got the rights to kind of remanufacture them and continue producing them. They might have been a PowerStop design originally, just like Nissan and Toyota get from Akebono. And obviously a lot of people source from Brembo. They're the third-party supplier that supplied those particular calipers for the Z06 and the Grand Sport and the C6 models. But PowerStop does offer those calipers, those exact calipers, for the front and the rear. But the two calipers for the front cost $850 just for the calipers. So you're paying $400 and some change per caliper. And that's expensive. At that point, you could elect to go for the Wilwoods. But the Wilwoods, even though they are better, absolutely better, they're a very small caliper, like as far as the actual size. And yeah, it doesn't really matter, but again, going back to the aesthetics thing, I like a big caliper that would fill up the whole wheel. And on top of that, their cheapest option, it uses the factory C5 rotor, which is fine, but it just kind of looks small and it doesn't fill up the wheel like you would expect big brakes to do. And this is when people can get into a shouting match of size doesn't matter. But, and in the case, as long as performance is there, it doesn't really matter how big the package is, as long as the performance is there. That's absolutely true. But again, from an aesthetic standpoint, having a nice big brake kit looks better. It just looks more luxurious. My point is, there's a hole, there's a vacuum right now where the Z06 C6 brakes used to be. Now there is nothing affordable that guys like myself can do that don't want to spend Wilwood money and don't want the Wilwood brakes because they're small and don't want the Z06 brakes because they're expensive. And from what I've heard, they are a little finicky on like track stuff. So I would want to research into seeing if there is an alternative option. And when I found out these calipers bolted up, now I've got an alternative option and I need to figure out how to make it work. Basically what I did is I got online and I looked up the calipers for the SS. And when I looked those up, I found out that there was another variation that is slightly smaller. That's for like the Cadillac ATS performance trim. I think it's also on like the luxury trim. And it's also the base caliper for the entry-level ATS-V. Most people, when they buy an ATS-V, and I believe the CTS-V has the same ones, they opt for the 6-piston. So that's the one that you typically see on the new ATS and the newest version of the CTS, the V3. They all have the 6-piston, but they do offer a 4-piston variation, which is this caliper. So basically, I was like, okay, well, this is the slightly smaller caliper. Let me see what the part numbers are, see if I can look them up on ACDelco, which I was able to find them. And I'll put part numbers, everything later in the video. But basically, I looked up the calipers, and I found out that the calipers are on Amazon for $135 a piece. You can't get C5 calipers brand new for $135. So basically I was like, all right, if I can get these calipers for $135, let me see what I can do for the rotors, figure out the math, and we'll go from there. I'll put screenshots of all the information that I have. Feel free to pause the video at any time to take a look at information. If you want to screenshot it for yourself, by all means. I'm not trying to make any money off of this. I'm literally just spreading the word for the community because here's something cool that I found that other guys might be interested. I already know that one of my friends that has a C5, we're already collecting the parts and building the kit for his car because he does autocross with me, and he's like, dude, this is awesome. This is so cool. So what I ultimately did is I started researching the rotors, and I started out by looking up just a base normal C5 rotor and to see what the specs are. And what I found, and I'll attach these documents. I'll probably just put them on the screen, honestly. The C5 document that I have showing here is literally from the ACDelco website. I just screenshotted it and turned it into one file. But I'm looking at the height, which is in the middle column. You'll see them highlighted in red here. The height is what I call the hub depth. Basically, it's the height from the backside face of the rotor. So like if you're laying it on the ground, it's the face that would be laying against the ground to the top of the hub where the wheel would then attach to and you put your lug nuts on. That's your hub depth. And that's an important number because the hub depth has to be the same in order to put the rotor in the same spot center-wise. If it's too far back, then you're screwed because you can't move the caliper back. You can't really shave off the studs or the ears of where the bolts go through for the caliper. If it's too far out, at least you can kind of get away with it. You might be able to put some type of a spacer or something on the caliper to push the caliper out, but at that point now you're pushing your wheel and assembly out and everything as well, so it just doesn't work. So you need to find the same hub height or hub depth. The next important number that I was looking at is the thickness. Now the base C5 thickness is 32 millimeters with a discard at 30 millimeters, meaning throw it away at 30 millimeters, but the normal thickness is 32 millimeters for the base C6, or C5 rather. Now this is an important number because the caliper that I'm bolting up on the ATS, the standard ATS and Camaro rotor is 30 millimeters. So I was worried that the 32 millimeter was going to be too wide to fit in the space that the rotor goes through the caliper where the pads slide into, and that's where it clamps at. I was worried that the 32 millimeter was going to be too big, but I wouldn't be able to really know that until I test fitted it. The next number I paid attention to is the outside diameter, and this is the one thing that I found kind of interesting. 325 millimeters for the base C5 rotor is identical to what the ATS has on it. Now, if you look up an ATS Premium with the 4-piston Brembo kit or an ATS-V with the 4-piston Brembos, it is also a 325 millimeter rotor. But because of how the caliper is designed, it looks like they designed it with the ears more pushed towards the center line of the hub, versus on the C5, those ears are further out because the caliper is not that big in factory form. So when you bolt the bigger caliper up, it doesn't work with the 325 millimeter rotor. So I'll explain this more in detail in a little bit later in the video once we get to the how-to section. But it's an interesting little thing that I ran into, and I'll show you the other options and what I ended up having to do. So finally, the last number I looked at, and this isn't a real important number, this was more just of a making sure that I'm not going to lose space or anything like that, is the pad contact surface width, which is 54 millimeters. So my first option of upgrading and trying to make up the distance is the C6 Z51 rotor. Looking at it, it was the same hub height of 45 millimeters. It had the same thickness of 32 millimeters, but it had an outside diameter of 340 millimeters versus the 325. So you're gaining 15 millimeters, which theoretically in my mind would have worked because when I originally measured it, I measured about 15 millimeters of difference between the where the C5 rotor was stopping and how much pad was still exposed that needed to be covered. I forgot to take into account that that was a diameter and not the radius. So you need to take that 15 and divide it in half. You're only gaining 7.5 millimeters from the center point of the rotor out to the edge. So that's where I ran into an issue. So I ordered these Z51s, I put them on, they worked, but I still had about 7 to 8 millimeters of pad showing that originally was covered, or originally wasn't covered but I still had 7 to 8 millimeters that were showing that was not touching the rotor. So 340 millimeters was not going to work. So my next step up from there was the C6 Z06 rotors. Now the Z06 rotors again have the same 45 millimeter hub height, and they still have the same 32 millimeter thickness, but now they are 355 millimeters. So from 325 to 355, that's 30 full millimeters bigger diameter. Divided by 2 is 15 millimeters, and it made up the distance perfectly. Now, whenever if you look into it, the brake pads have maybe half a millimeter of overhang, which isn't a big deal. You're allowed to have a little bit of overhang. Ideally, it should be perfectly flush, but for the sake of the situation, a half a millimeter is not going to make a difference. But I'll explain all of that more in detail once I get to the how-to. But yeah, so I ended up going with that. I ordered some Z06 rotors, put them on yesterday, and that's why this video's been a little bit delayed too, is because I was kind of still working out some of the details, but they worked perfectly. And driving the car around yesterday, driving the car around today, the brakes work fantastic. So that's what you need to do. So the last part of the video I want to talk about is the pricing. By doing this, the rotors, the Z06 rotors, are $165 a piece. The calipers, like I've already said, are $135 a piece. Plus you have your brake lines, which were $90. I got the Wilwood brake lines. You could reuse your own brake lines if you don't care about having stainless steel, but I figured since I'm upgrading, I might as well go all the way. I bought brand new hardware for the bolts that actually bolted up to not to the bracket, but to the knuckle. You don't have to do that. The hardware is correct. You don't have to do any drilling or anything. I know there is some speculation with the F-body guys that like to do caliper conversions to like the C5 calipers. They've started using these calipers as well, and that's kind of where I got the idea. But they have to actually drill their knuckle out because they use an M12 bolt, not an M14 for whatever reason. But yeah, so you could reuse your factory hardware. Me though, for safety, in my opinion, it was best idea to use brand new hardware and make sure that's torqued down and whatnot. So I'll put that's in the parts description that I did already. But basically what I calculated it out is for 2 rotors, 2 calipers, brake lines, hardware, pads, everything. And of course you could go get better pads. You could probably go get some EBCs or some Hawks or something like that. I just went with the ACDelcos for now just to test it to make sure everything's good. I do plan on upgrading, but I wanted to make sure everything was kosher first. Found out that it is around $700 to $800 depending at the time of the making of this video. Prices might go up. About $700 to $800 for 2 front calipers, rotors, and the whole 9. $800 comparatively to Z06 conversion just for the front using the power stop remanufactured Z06 calipers and Z06 rotors. Obviously that was about $1,500, and I did a full spreadsheet. If anybody's interested in that, I can send that to you. I figure you don't want to see all the math and all the stupid crap. And then I also calculated doing the Wilwood kit, the basic Wilwood kit. It's $900 just for the calipers plus new rotors and stuff like that. The reason I don't like the Wilwood kit, and it has nothing to do with the kit. The kit's actually very good. I've got friends who've used it. They love them. My gripe is the fact that it's Wilwood, and you would either have to order it from Summit or Wilwood or Jags or somebody. You'd have to source it, and being that we're in a major parts crisis right now, if something were to happen, you might not be able to get that caliper for days, weeks, months. It might get back ordered, and it's not a normal off-the-shelf part. The ATS calipers, God forbid something happens, one, you can go to a dealership and buy them, no problem. You just have the part number. And even if you can't go to the dealership and buy them, or Amazon or whatever, like let's say they back order for some reason, there's ATSs on the road running around with these right now that you could go get a used one from a car that's been crashed, either on eBay or whatever. There's always going to be availability. And some people will say, oh, well, you can do that with the Z06 calipers. Absolutely, yes, you can. But they're the same price, if not more, used than the ATS calipers are new. So why would you do that? With that being said, my final thoughts on this whole situation are, for $800 versus $15 versus $1,000 for the Wilwood kit. We'll just say $1,000 after you do some of the other stuff, because again, you need to get lines, you need to get a few other things. It's just the best bang for your buck, or best break for your buck if you want to get cheesy. I just like it. I think it's better. I think it's cheaper. I think it's a more economical alternative. And from what I've researched and what I've found, is some guys say that the ATS brakes work better. The Brembos work better than the Wilwoods. Or not the Wilwoods, the C6 Z06s. So the power stops, we'll just say the power stops. The Brembos just work better. And at that point, when you're talking about a safety item, especially if you're going to be using it at the track, knowing that even though it's a 4-piston instead of a 6-piston, this kind of goes back to that whole size doesn't matter. If 6 pistons works less well than 4 pistons, I'll take the 4-piston. I don't care. And at that point, that's what matters. And on top of that, just dealing with if you've ever seen the pads that you have to use on the C6 rotors, they're like each individual and you have to bolt them in, and it's a whole ordeal. I've got a friend that's got a C6Z and he says it's a pain in the butt. So versus this is literally just 2 pads you slide in, and that's all you have to worry about. 2 pads, 2 pins, a little plate in the middle. Again, I'll show you in the how-to. But I just feel like it kind of checks all the boxes. It's cheaper, it's more affordable, which that means 2 different things. The parts are cheaper to acquire. Maintenance is more affordable to deal with. They're more accessible, theoretically. They're easier to work on. The ease of maintenance is there, and they look good. So why the heck not? Okay, so I got my information pulled up here now, and basically the criteria that I was looking at is I needed to find a rotor and a caliper that would fit inside at least an 18-inch wheel. 17 would be great for the people who don't want to change wheels out, or do something aftermarket or something like that. But with big brakes like this, you're probably going to need an 18 at least. Anyway, I have seen some of the F-body guys who've done this swap and were able to retain their 17-inch Firebird wheel. So it's possible, but I cannot confirm. I have 18s, so that's what I was working for. So what I was looking at is I looked at a couple different caliper options, and I narrowed it down to the caliper that comes on the ATS-V, and pulling up the specs for it, GM part number 1722768 and 2777 were the 2 part numbers for the left and right caliper. You can technically just buy one side, but then you have to move the little bleeder screws and stuff like that and swap it to the other side. It's easier just to buy one of each caliper. All right, so these are some of the other part numbers that I used as far as the caliper pins and the just the brake pads, because I just used basic ACDelco brake pads just to not worry about it. I'm going to get some grippier brake pads. I do plan on using this for some track use, but I'm not going to get too crazy with it, so I just wanted to make it functional at first. Yeah, that's right. So I'll go ahead and start with the bolts that you're going to need for the knuckle. They are going to be this part number here. Let me go, there you go. 1161185. These there's going to be 2 per side, 4 total, and they're just basically 14 millimeter big bolts that have like Loctite. It's not liquid, but it's almost like a powdered goo. I don't know really how to call it, like the material, but it's got some stuff at the end of the bolt that helps kind of Loctite it into the knuckle. It's not going to be like impossible to get off, but it helps prevent it from backing off, as long as you torque it to the right spec. So you're going to need 4 of those. Then you have your brake caliper pin kit. It's the 2 pins and the kind of like the locking bridge. I don't know what that's called, but it's the little bridge that puts pressure on the pads inside the caliper. It's going to be this part number here. 18 kilo 1971 X-ray. You'll need just one box. It comes with 2 bridges, 4 pins. That's all you're gonna need. And then obviously you have the brake pads. Where's the part number on this? There it is. 17 Delta 1050 Michael. These are your standard ACDelco pads. I literally had GM look up 2016, 2017 ATS Premium, ATS-V base, and they told me that these are the pads. They're high performance pads, but they're not. I mean, obviously you could probably get Hawk pads, or you could get some EBCs or something like that that are going to be better, but these are at least going to work. If you're just doing normal street driving, this is probably all you're going to need. You're not going to need any of those big, super aggressive pads. But yeah, so that was all the GM stuff. And then I went with brand new brake lines, or yeah, brake hoses as well. I wanted to go to stainless steel. I've been told that you can use the factory brake lines because these Wilwood brake lines that I bought are literally just factory replacement. They have the exact same fittings on it. They're just stainless steel for the C5s. So you could reuse your brake lines if you want to. If you just want to take the nut off of the knuckle or off of the caliper and throw it onto the new caliper, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure you put new washers on. I wanted to go to stainless steel. If you want to go to stainless steel as well, that's your part number 220-8021. I also painted the rotors. So the paint that I use is just your standard. I just got it at O'Reilly's. At first you have to do primer. You want to make sure you prime them. I didn't have to like sand them or anything because the calipers come in raw cast. What I did is I just hit them with some brake cleaner and just kind of scrub brushed them to make sure that they were clean and dry. And then I put one good solid coat of this primer, which this is technically flame-proof primer, so it's for like headers and engine blocks and stuff like that, but they didn't have any caliper primer. And I talked to the guys at the counter. They were like, this works just fine. A lot of guys do it for their brake rotor or brake calipers and never have an issue. So I got this, put it over there. Then I went with red because the theme, I guess you could say, that I have for my car is it's a silver car with red accents, or red and black accents. I'm trying to keep it kind of factory-ish looking OEM plus. So I went with red brake calipers because it's pretty standard. I mean, every Corvette's got red brake calipers, it seems like, unless you get special yellow, special blue, or whatever. So I went with red. It looks fantastic. It looks factory. And then I put a couple coats of clear on it. I did probably 3 or 4 coats of the red, and then probably 2 or 3 coats of the clear. I also got little decals, and I don't have anything to show you, but I got little decals off Amazon. I literally just searched Corvette caliper decal, and it came right up. It's 2 larger decals and then 2 smaller decals. The larger decal fit perfectly. It was exactly the right size. It had a little bit of a curve, like an arch to it, so it matches the arch that the caliper has in it, just kind of in its casting. It looks fantastic. I put that on and then clear coated it, so at least it kind of protects and seals the sticker to the caliper. I did have a little bit of a boo-boo, and I was really mad at myself. I bumped it with the wheel as I was putting the wheel on, and it kind of messed up the E on the passenger side. So it's not perfect. I mean, obviously putting the clear coat on it helped, but it's not going to make it indestructible. So make sure you practice safety and make sure you practice being careful, because if you do nick these calipers, they will chip, they will scratch. And I guess before I get started, I should show you how good these actually turned out and kind of what I'm doing. So don't mind the mess. It's a tiny workbench, but basically I've got 2 calipers. Obviously these are the calipers that I listed earlier in the video. They come in just raw metal cast. Basically they got the Cadillac logo on them. I put about 3 or 4 coats of red. Well, I put 2 coats of primer, or sorry, a single coat of primer, and then 3 or 4 coats of red, and then probably 2 or 3 coats of clear. I didn't do clear all the way on the back and everything because the clear was kind of doing a weird thing, so I didn't want to risk causing a problem, but luckily it stayed very nice and shiny without too much Like it doesn't look like it was painted. It actually looks similar to the factory Corvette brakes that are on the C7. I've got a friend that's got a C7 and I compared them to his, and they look pretty much the same, because surprisingly enough, the ones that come on the Corvette are not powder coated, they're painted, just like these are basically. So, but yeah, so I will go ahead and start getting these mounted. I just wanted to give you all like a close up of how they turned out. I've got all brand new hardware, all brand new pads, everything that's gonna be going in it. It's basically gonna be like a whole brand new setup, obviously, and the calipers themselves are brand new. So yeah, from there, let's go ahead and get them installed. All right, so I'm gonna start on the passenger side just because it's a little bit more room for me to work and be able to record and everything. Driver's side will be literally the identical same process, just mirror imaged, so I'm not going to show both sides. It's just easier just to show one side. But what I've done is I've go ahead and turned the wheel to where you have better access, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be removing this bolt and this bolt. This is for the caliper bracket, this is for the caliper slide pin, and then this is for the actual caliper bracket. I believe this is a 13 and a 15, maybe a 17. And then this, I believe, was a 19 or 20. I'll verify those when I actually tear it apart, and I'll put it in the video somewhere. But yeah. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and take this off, and then I'll go from there. All right. So I actually did confirm the bolt for the caliper slide pin is a 15 millimeter. I'm using a ratcheting 15 millimeter just because it's easier. And then to hold the slide pin itself in place, there's a second little one right here where you can hold the slide pin in place and break that bolt loose without everything spinning all at once. That is an 18 millimeter. And then on the back here, right here, is a 21, I believe. Yeah, 21. So that way you can get everything, and there's obviously two bolts, one on the top, one on the bottom, and then same, one on top, one on the bottom. Once you get this caliper off, I'm just gonna tuck it away for now because I'm not gonna necessarily do the hydraulics until the very end. Just in case something happens, I would heavily suggest leaving your hydraulics installed until you know for an absolute fact that you are ready to finish that after you test fitted everything. From this point, I'm going to do probably like a fast motion, whatever, just doing it real quick because again, it's literally just brakes. So this is it's 4 bolts. It's really easy. But like I said, keep the caliper off to the side. Take the bracket off entirely because you're not going to reuse it. The new caliper bolts up right to the knuckle, so you will not need this bracket anymore. You could technically reuse the hardware, but I have new hardware that I'm going to be putting in, so I'll explain all that when I get there. All right. At this point, I am going to be putting the new hardware on. So what these are, and I'll put the part number in the description as well as everything else, but these are brand new bolts that the ATS-V uses specifically. I'm sure it's used on other cars too, like the Corvette, Camaro, pretty much anything that's got these style of Brembos on it. But these are brand new bolts. They come with the locking, I guess you could call it Loctite technically. I remember when I first test fitted, I had to use some washers and some spacers. So what I did is luckily I had them in my shop, but you can just go to Home Depot or O'Reilly's, probably not O'Reilly's honestly. Home Depot or Lowe's, they're just your thicker, I'd say they're probably like 1 to 2 millimeter spacers. and they're designed for a M14 bolt, so they fit perfectly. Factory Corvettes also have this thick washer that goes on the, like, actually up against the flange of the bolt, because the factory bolts don't have a built-in flange like these do. There you go. So I'm not sure that, based off the distance there, it should be good. But if these stick out too far without this washer on, then I might need to put this washer on just as like a spacer for the bolt, so it doesn't run into the back of the rotor. I saw a couple videos on YouTube that using this hardware causes the bolt to touch the rotor on the backside for the guys that did this on like the F-body Camaro and Trans Ams. So we'll see if we have that same problem. If we do, then I'll put this little spacer in. If not, then I'll do it just by itself. All right, so this is what it looks like bolted up. I haven't torqued them down yet, but they're tightly on there. And what I was talking about is where this bolt goes all the way through. On the F-body guys, I guess this distance wasn't enough to take up the space to where the other side of the bolt was just barely starting to scrape against the rotor there. Thankfully, we don't have that problem, it looks like. I did put a little, there's that little 1mm spacer. And what that does is that allows for the rotor to sit perfectly in the middle of the caliper there. You got just enough room on each side. Looks like there's just ever so slightly more room on this side than there is this side, but it shouldn't have any significance because the pads do fit pretty freely in there, and the pistons will make up that distance and keep it pretty even. But yeah, this is what it looks like bolted up. I do have some mild concerns, like I was talking about, with the rotor still not being big enough, I guess. As you can see where the rotor ends versus the pad, it's like right there. So I'm gonna put the pads in and see like what the difference is. If it's more than 10mm, you'll probably need to do a Z06 rotor. I'll finish it up tonight and get the hydraulics and everything working, and I can use it for a couple days. And I'll get out the Z06 rotors on order immediately. But other than that, everything clears just fine. Everything as far as rotation, there's no issues or anything like that. So I'm gonna throw the pads in real quick and see where it lines up. All right. So I greased up the pads because obviously you want to make sure you grease up your pad, and I also greased the inside where they slide, because these don't have slide pins like the old calipers do. They just literally just slide on the caliper itself. So, but just kind of slide them in there. Just don't be kind of tight. That one actually went in really nicer. This one was the one that was tight. I think it's a little tight because of the paint, but oh yeah, see, that's much better now. All right, so looking like, I don't know if you can see it, but see how there's still a ridge there, and these pads are lined up with where the pins will be. That tells me that this rotor is still a hair too small. What I'll do from here is go ahead and get some Z06 rotors, since they have the wider 355mm rotor height, or face height, whatever you want to call it, the diameter, and see if that works, because it looks like that's about 10 millimeters, right on 10 millimeters, maybe a little bit less. And a Z06 rotor would be 15, so it might be too big and it might not fit in the caliper. So I'm kind of in a weird spot now where a Z06 rotor might be too big and a Z51 rotor might not be big enough, so I might have to compromise. We'll see. But I'm going to go ahead and get this bolted up and kind of make it to where it's going to work and go from there. If you've never done brakes on this style of caliper before, you have two pins that go in like so and hold the actual brake pads in place. So you'll slide those in just like that, and you line them up, and then there's a little hole right here that the tip, I'll show you up close. So the tip of the pin has this little like extra tip, and that goes inside this hole. And then on the other side, it's got this little clamp ring that will squeeze, almost like a piston ring in a way, but it'll squeeze tight and fit nice and snug, and you just have to tap them in. But make sure you don't forget your spacer here. Or I don't really know what this is called, honestly, but what it is it hooks on to the rod there, and you just kind of slide it in, and then you just have to get kind of aggressive with it and bend the other side in, slide your other pin in like so, and then just kind of center it. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of center it. And what that does is that holds tension. It holds the pads in place, but it holds tension against the pads so they don't have a tendency to try and fall out or move around. And then just take a little pin here, you just tap it in until it won't tap no more on both sides, top and bottom. And voila, that is a fully assembled Brembo caliper. One other thing I wanted to show y'all real quick that I forgot I was going to talk about is the wheel spacer. Wheel spacers are kind of interesting, where you have two different styles. This style here is a hub-centric bolt-on spacer. So basically what it does is it gives you 5 lug nuts that you put on your factory studs, and you bolt it down, and then you have 5 more studs you actually bolt the wheel to that are part of the spacer. As you can see, like if I pull it out, obviously these studs are part of the spacer. I like these spacers better. Some people prefer the slip-on shim style. Always get a spacer that is hub-centric. Do not get a spacer that just kind of flops around and doesn't really line up with anything. This one's a little loose, but it is hub-centric. Like, you can pull it off and you can move it around, but like once you get it on that lip, it is machined specifically for the car, so it's not gonna move around. I'm gonna bolt this down real quick, but you're gonna need some form of a spacer. This is a 20 millimeter spacer, and I think 20 millimeters is probably more than enough. When I test fitted it the first time, my spoke cleared the face of the caliper by a good probably 10 millimeters. So you could probably get away with as small as a 10 millimeter spacer. Personally, I think you should do a 20 anyway, depending on what wheel you're running up front. And obviously if you're running aftermarket or if you're running factory, whatever you're doing, you need to check your stuff before anything. Do a test fit, see what you're looking at, buy a spacer if you need it. But personally, and this is completely unrelated to the brake situation, these spacers, a 20 millimeter spacer on the front with a factory 8.5 or 9-inch wide wheel puts the top or the front face of the wheel almost perfectly flush with the fender, and it just looks so good. Especially like in my case, I'm running an 18 in the front and a 19 in the back from a factory base model C6. I think they're called Speedline wheels or something like that, but they're like the updated 5-spoke. Like they had the 5-spoke from like 2005 all the way to 2013 or whatever, but they also had an updated Speedline that was, I think, from like 2010 maybe. Anyway, that wheel on this car looks so good, and with the spacer, it picks it perfectly flush with the fender. So like you come around the hip of the fender and you immediately hit the wheel face, and it just looks really clean. So completely unrelated to the brake, I think you should run a 20 mil spacer just for cosmetic purposes. But beyond that, if you're gonna run these big brakes, you do need some form of a spacer, just to at least pull it out about 10 millimeters. I would say 15 is probably the safest number that I would go, as far as going as far in as you can. I run 20 because I think it looks really good. And I'll throw the wheel on real quick before I do the hydraulics, just so you can see what I'm looking at and what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's the information about the spacer. One thing I'll say really quickly about the spacers as well, the extra lug or the extra stud that you have, some wheels have pockets on the back side of the wheel that allow you to fit those extra stud pockets. In my case, my wheel does allow for that, which helps out a lot because then you don't have to shave these down. But if you do a spacer like this and you don't have those pockets on the back side of the wheel, you will have to shave your factory studs down. That's why some people prefer to do the like an extended stud and pop the old studs out and put extended studs out that are basically this long, but use that hole and then just put a slip-on spacer that's hub-centric. And that's why both options are completely valid. I just personally like these bolt-on ones better because they're more serviceable. Frankly, I feel like they're a little bit safer too because it actually bolts down and becomes part of the hub. Plus it holds your rotor in place and stuff like that. Versus a slip-on one, it's literally just slipped on. So you have the lug, but if those lugs come loose or if a stud snaps or whatever, there's nothing holding that spacer on. And I have heard that there's vibration issues sometimes, but I think that's more because they're the cheaper spacers. If you get a good quality slip-on spacer that's machined to a high tolerance and stuff like that, I'm sure they're absolutely fine. But yeah, let me go ahead and throw the wheel on. So this is up close. Like I was saying, ignore the E. I just put a little boo-boo, I'll have to fix that. But as far as the spacing for the spoke over the caliper face, I've got about 10 millimeters there, so I've got plenty of room for it to, let's see if I can get nice and high. Yeah, there we go. I've got plenty of room for it to move around, no issue. That's why I think you could probably go with a little bit smaller spacer, but personally I think you should still go with the 20 just for aesthetic purposes. The one thing I've got a little bit of a concern about is these little humps right here. Right at the very edge, the top corner. If you watch, as the wheel comes around, the wheel weight gets paper close. Right there. It clears it. You've probably got like a decent thick cardstock's worth of space there, but it's very close. I think I'll be okay. If anything, it should kind of clearance itself, which is not necessarily the best thing to do, but this is soft metal, and this has got a couple layers of paint that it should be able to kind of shave itself. I don't think it's gonna be an issue though. But that's a problem with this wheel specifically. This is that wheel I was talking about, the Speedline wheel. Ignore that it's extremely dirty. These wheels, they're 18, but this inside drum is very like close to the wheel assembly, or to the rotor and brake assemblies. So I think the inside diameter is more closer to like a 17 rather than an 18, which could argue the fact, could you run these brakes with 17s? I can't confirm that. I have read and watched videos of, again, F-body guys who have done this conversion, who have run 17, like the factory Firebird 17s, and not had an issue. But personally, I think an 18 is just better up front anyway. Again, subjective opinion, but that's what we are looking at, and minus the rotor needing to be ever so slightly bigger. That's the whole situation. All right, so next step is going to be the hydraulic, which I've already done one side because I kind of wanted to get an idea of what I was dealing with before I made the video about it, because the hydraulics can be a pain in the butt sometimes, especially with this where the flex hose connects to the hardline, and especially on older cars, they tend to be kind of old and seized. So like this clip on the other side, I fought with it for a good bit, and looks like this one actually might be a little bit nicer to me. If it doesn't just rotate, it might just rotate on me. It'd be a pain in the ass. But yeah, so the next goal is to get the hydraulics hooked up on this side. Like I said, I already did the other side, so I'm gonna kind of just do a montage of doing all of this. I've already hooked up this line. This was easy. You just pull the plug out, you put a crush washer, and then the actual main line, and another crush washer, and then the banjo bolt. It's a 14 mil. You just tighten it down to where it's basically, what I did is I got it as about as snug could get, and then just gave it a little yank just to give it that little bit of extra. But that should be good to go. I couldn't find specs anywhere on that. I'm sure, being that it's a factory caliper, you could do the factory spec, but this is a different line than factory, so it is what it is. I will say also on the other side, once I hooked up the line and everything, and I'll kind of talk about this more in detail here in a moment, once I actually get it hooked up. But once I got this line hooked up, I cracked both the bleeders to kind of let it gravity bleed for a couple minutes. I expected it to take a while because these are big calipers. Those things were leaking from the top within like 2 minutes, so I was like, oh dang, okay. So that's one thing that you should know is, once you actually start filling the caliper with fluid, be ready to start filling things up, because it's going to go quickly. But I'll go over that whole process and everything as well. But let me go ahead and get this line attached in a quick montage. So a quick explanation, I've got the hard line off, so this is completely loose. Obviously this isn't hooked up yet, but one issue I did have also is this bracket right here. Let's see if I can move the cloth. That bracket right there, the line goes into it. That line has basically become one with the bracket, so I had to give it some acoustic persuasion. I'm trying to make this cloth stay. To try and make sure that it actually came out without damaging the bracket. I didn't want to damage anything. So what I had to do is I have to take the bracket completely off and take the bracket and the caliper and everything over to my vise and basically just kind of tap the line out of the bracket, and then I have a little file that I just kind of filed down the inside of the bracket back to a kind of a smooth edge. Just breaking down some of that surface rust. I have a feeling this car might have been in the north in its lifetime. I never pulled the Carfax on it just because it was a higher mileage, needed some work. Corvette, I didn't care. But I have a feeling, because there's some areas where you can tell like there's some surface rust and stuff. Doesn't look like it lived in the north necessarily, like they took it out on like during the winter or anything. But you can tell it has some some salt and some grime and stuff like that. So I have a feeling it just it did exist in the north at some point. The guy I bought it from, he said he was from Jersey originally, so maybe it was him or maybe it was the owner before. But yeah, basically what I've done is I've just taken this whole bracket and everything off. I'll take it over to the bench, knock it out real quick. I don't think I need to show you that because it's pretty self-explanatory. And then we'll go ahead and hook this line up. And voila, that's pretty much everything. Next thing I'm going to focus on is these bleeders here, which, let me adjust the camera a little bit. Put it like right there. Perfect. So this is the back bleeder, and then the front bleeder is up here. Can't really see it. I might be able to just do it this way. Yeah, that'll work. Where's that at? Yeah, right there. So what you first got to do is obviously take the little caps off, and then I researched this online. I found the normal like operations manual for like technicians and whatnot at dealerships, and they say that always do the back half of the caliper first and then the front half. What I'm going to do on this side, just like I did on the other side, is I'm going to let it kind of gravity bleed for a little bit. Couple minutes sounds like all it needs. Whoops. Slide you back in here. There we go. So yeah, so I'm just gonna pop this loose, as well as this one. Let it gravity bleed for 2 or 3 minutes. Like I said, it should be pretty quick. And then from there, I might try and just vacuum bleed it, but I might try and foot bleed it as well. I might do both just to verify. But yeah, so that is that's pretty much it as far as the hydraulics, other than the bleeding process. Beyond that, I'd say it's pretty self-explanatory. Well, I officially got the hydraulics all bled and have a pretty good pressure on the pedal. So I would say that this job is officially done. I'm gonna go ahead and comprise everything together into one long video that I'm probably gonna put on YouTube. So if you're watching it from there, thank you for joining me. But yeah, if you have any questions, by all means, shoot me a comment wherever you're seeing this, whether it be YouTube, or you can contact me directly if it's on like Facebook or whatever. But yeah, I think this is about it. I'm not gonna put the wheel back on yet because I am starting another project where I'm gonna be replacing those with some fancy silver Neo Max coilovers. So that's my next project that I'm gonna be starting here in a moment. But as far as the brake swap goes, I appreciate everybody giving me the attention and time of day, and hopefully if you decide to tackle this, you enjoy it and have as good of a time as I did. Thanks. Bye.